The ferryman spat into the churning gray water as the boat pitched violently. "Last stop," he grunted, gesturing with a thick thumb towards the spire of rock clawing its way out of the mist. "St. Augustine's Needle. Ain't much, but she's yours now." I didn't reply, just tightened my grip on the damp railing, my knuckles white. Elias Thorne, newly appointed keeper of the St. Augustine Lighthouse. It sounded more romantic than it looked. The island was a jagged scar on the face of the unforgiving Atlantic, perpetually shrouded in fog or lashed by rain. The lighthouse itself, though technically advanced and largely automated, stood like a defiant old soldier against the elements, its stone base scarred by centuries of salty abuse. Perfect. Isolation was what I'd craved since Eleanor left. Work provided structure. The sea provided noise to drown out the silence. The ferryman helped me unload my meager supplies onto the slick stone jetty. A month's worth of non-perishables, books, clothes, and the toolkit specified in the contract. He didn't linger. Radio check-in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at noon. Generator fuel drop first Tuesday of the month, weather permitting. Emergency beacons in the lantern room. Don't go swimming. With a final, uneasy glance back at the lighthouse, he clambered back onto his boat, cast off the lines, and was swallowed by the fog before I could even wave goodbye, not that I'd intended to. Alone. The word echoed in the shriek of unseen gulls. Good. The climb up the winding stone steps from the jetty to the lighthouse base was punishing. The air was thick with the smell of brine, damp rock, and something else, something faintly metallic and unpleasant, like old blood. Inside, the lighthouse was surprisingly modern in its workings, a stark contrast to the ancient exterior. Banks of humming servers, weather monitoring equipment, automated lens rotation mechanisms. A small, functional living area was built into the lower levels, kitchenette, bunk, desk, chair. Spartan, but clean. The official operations manual was thick, detailing every function, every maintenance schedule, every emergency protocol for the automated systems. Predictable. Reliable. Exactly what I needed. But tucked beneath it, left on the desk as if by accident, was a slim, worn leather-bound notebook. The cover was blank. Inside, written in a cramped, spidery hand, was a different set of instructions. Unofficial keeper's log and admonishments, read carefully. Intrigued, I sat down, the worn chair groaning under my weight, and began to read. Most entries detailed mundane observations or complaints about faulty equipment, already noted and seemingly fixed according to the official logs. But interspersed were other things. Rules, scribbled with an urgency that belied their strangeness. 1. The automation is reliable, mostly. Trust the machines, but always verify. 2. Never look directly at the beam when it sweeps past the living quarters between 3 a.m. and 3:03 a.m. Keep curtains drawn. 3. Ignore the singing. It comes with the storms, sometimes without. It isn't real. 4. If the foghorn sounds 3 times in rapid succession when there is no fog, lock the inner steel door at the base of the tower immediately. Do not open it for any reason until sunrise, verified by the clock. 5. Do not leave the lighthouse structure between sunset and sunrise. The jetty is not safe after dark. 6. Check the outer seals daily. Especially the lower ones near the tide line. They wear faster than they should. 7. If you find saltwater puddles inside the tower where they shouldn't be, above the high tide mark, report equipment malfunction immediately via radio, then clean it up. Do not touch the water with bare skin. 8. Leave the offering. The last rule had been partially scratched out, followed by a frantic scribble, "No, don't. It only encourages them." I frowned, flipping through the pages. The handwriting grew increasingly erratic towards the end. The last entry was brief, dated 3 months prior, just before the previous keeper, Alistair Finch, had apparently abandoned his post without notice. Storms coming. Heard the singing again last night, closer this time. Horn blew 3 times, clear skies. Locked the door. Something scratched at it all night. It knew I was here. Have to leave. Can't stay. It knows. I closed the notebook, a faint unease prickling my skin despite my skepticism. Finch was known to be eccentric, a solitary man prone to fanciful notions, or so the regional supervisor had hinted. Probably just loneliness and the isolation getting to him. Stress, maybe booze. Singing. Scratching. Saltwater puddles. Sounded like a man losing his grip. Still, the rules were oddly specific. The first few days passed uneventfully. I established a routine: systems check at dawn, maintenance tasks, log entries, radio check-ins, reading, preparing meals, watching the endless gray sea. The automation worked flawlessly. The lighthouse was a self-contained world, humming along reliably. The silence was vast, broken only by the wind, the waves, and the rhythmic sweep of the light above. It was exactly the oblivion I'd sought. I kept Finch's notebook, more out of curiosity than concern, a relic of the man who couldn't handle the solitude. On the 5th night, the storm hit. It came on suddenly, the wind screaming like a banshee, rain hammering against the thick lantern room glass. The sea turned into a boiling cauldron, waves exploding against the base of the tower with concussive force that shuddered through the stone. I checked the monitors, all systems holding steady, the light cutting its powerful beam through the tempest. I made coffee, the roar outside a comforting wall of sound. Around 2 a.m., the radio crackled to life, overriding the maritime weather channel I'd left on low. Not with a distress call, but with a burst of static, followed by something else. A garbled, distorted sound, rhythmic, almost melodic, but warped and broken, like a tape playing backwards or voices struggling through water. It lasted only a few seconds before cutting out, replaced by the droning weather report. I checked the radio equipment, diagnostics showed no errors. Strange interference, I reasoned. Storms could do weird things to signals out here. I dismissed it, though the sound lingered unnervingly in my mind. I tried to read, but the storm's fury was escalating. The lighthouse groaned under the assault. Then, precisely at 3:01 a.m. according to the digital clock on the console, a klaxon alarm blared through the tower. Red lights flashed across the control panel. Primary lens rotation failure. Backup system engaged, manual override required. Damn it, Alistair, you jinxed me, I muttered, grabbing a heavy-duty flashlight and my rain slicker. The backup system kept the light itself burning, but the rotation motor had failed. Protocol required manual operation during failures to ensure the beam kept sweeping, warning ships away from the treacherous coast. Pulling on my gear, I headed towards the internal spiral staircase that led up to the lantern room. The wind howled even louder in the stairwell, whistling through unseen cracks in the ancient stone. As I began the long climb, flashlight beam dancing on the worn steps, another sound reached me, faint at first, almost lost in the storm's cacophony. It was high-pitched, ethereal, and disturbingly beautiful. A melody without words, weaving through the roar of the wind and waves. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, but strongest when I faced the sea-facing windows. Singing. Coming from outside. My blood ran cold as Finch's third rule slammed into my mind: ignore the singing. It isn't real. But it sounded incredibly real. Chillingly, hypnotically real. And it was getting closer. My flashlight beam trembled on the spiraling metal steps. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to retreat to the relative safety of the living quarters and ignore the flashing alarm. The automation is reliable, mostly. Finch's first rule echoed, mocking my predicament. But the primary rotation had failed. Protocol was clear. Ignoring it could mean wrecking a ship, lives lost. That responsibility weighed heavier than the growing dread. Taking a deep breath, steeling myself against the siren song outside, I continued the climb. The melody grew clearer, resolving into multiple voices, though still wordless. It was achingly sad, yet held an undercurrent of something predatory. It wrapped around the howling wind, seeming to ride the gusts that slammed against the tower. It isn't real. I chanted the words internally like a mantra, focusing on the rhythmic clank of my boots on the metal stairs. Reaching the lantern room felt like surfacing from a deep dive. The roar of the storm was amplified here, a physical pressure against the thick, curved glass panels. Rain lashed the panes, blurring the chaotic sea beyond. The main lens, a colossal assembly of precisely cut glass, hung stationary, its powerful bulb still blazing, casting a stark, unmoving beam into the tempest. The backup motor whined uselessly. I moved to the manual crank mechanism, a heavy, geared wheel designed for just this emergency. Gripping the cold metal handles, I began the laborious process of turning the lens. It was heavy work, the gears grinding in protest against the storm's force trying to hold it still. Slowly, painstakingly, the massive lens began to rotate, the beam sweeping across the tumultuous waves. Outside, the singing intensified. It felt responsive. As the beam swept across a particular patch of churning water directly below, the voices swelled, sharp and piercing, cutting through the storm's roar. It sounded like agony, or perhaps, ecstasy. I forced myself not to look down, focusing solely on the rhythm of the crank, the steady sweep of the light. Maintain the rotation. Follow protocol. Then came the scratching. It started faintly, almost indistinguishable from the rain and debris hitting the glass. But it was rhythmic, persistent. Scrape, drag, scrape. Like claws against stone, coming from the outer walkway that encircled the lantern room. My blood turned to ice. Something scratched at it all night. It knew I was here. Finch's last entry. My hands tightened on the crank. Don't stop. Don't look. The singing swirled around the tower, seeming to merge with the scraping sounds. It was a chorus of the damned, serenading whatever was trying to get in. The manual stated the lantern room glass was several inches thick, designed to withstand hurricane-force winds and impacts from large birds. But the scraping sounded, determined. Scrape. Crack. I flinched violently. One of the thick glass panes facing the open sea now sported a network of fractures, originating from a single point near the base. Saltwater spray immediately began to seep through the cracks, misting the air inside. Panic seized me. Whatever was out there, it was strong enough to damage the reinforced glass. The singing reached a fever pitch, triumphant, almost celebratory. The scraping stopped. I held my breath, straining my ears over the storm and the pounding of my own heart. A heavy thud echoed from the metal roof above the lantern room. Then another, closer to the access hatch. It was on the roof. My eyes darted to the heavy steel hatch set into the ceiling, bolted securely from the inside. Finch's log hadn't mentioned anything getting inside. Just scratching at the door. Keep turning the light. That was the priority. But my arms ached, my breath came in ragged gasps, and the terror was paralyzing. The beam swept around, its unwavering path a stark contrast to my internal chaos. Land, sea, land, sea. Then, directly above the bolted hatch, a slow, dark stain began to spread across the metal ceiling. Seeping. Dripping. Not rainwater. It was viscous, dark, and carried that faint, unpleasant metallic tang I'd noticed on the steps earlier. Old blood. A single, thick drop fell, splattering onto the pristine glass of the main lens assembly below with a soft pat. I gagged, stumbling back from the crank, my flashlight falling and skittering across the metal floor. The lens remained stationary, its beam now fixed, pointing uselessly towards a section of raging sea where the singing seemed loudest. Manual override required. The alarm continued its relentless blare. From the hatch above, came a soft, wet, thump. Followed by another. Rhythmic. Like something heavy and sodden being bumped against the metal. And then, a sound that made the storm and the singing fade into terrifying insignificance. A faint, childish giggle, seemingly coming directly from the other side of the bolted steel hatch. The giggle echoed, thin and reedy, cutting through the storm's roar and the manic thumping above. It wasn't playful, it was chillingly devoid of warmth, like the sound of splintering ice. Blood continued to drip steadily now, pooling slightly on the floor near the lens mechanism, tracing intricate patterns before coalescing. My stomach heaved, the metallic scent thick in the air. My gaze snapped back to the hatch. Heavy steel, 4 thick bolts securing it from this side. It looked secure. But the rhythmic bumping against it continued, soft and wet, punctuated by that awful, intermittent giggle. Something was up there, trying to get down. Forget the lens. Survival instinct kicked in, overriding protocol. I scrambled across the floor, retrieving my fallen flashlight. Its beam cut erratically through the red emergency strobes, illuminating the dripping blood on the hatch. Keeping one eye fixed on it, I fumbled for the radio clip to my belt. St. Augustine Lighthouse to mainland control, do you read? Emergency situation. Primary lens rotation failure, manual override engaged. Potential structural compromise in lantern room. Unidentified, contact, attempting breach. My voice was hoarse, cracking with fear. Only static answered. The storm must have knocked out communications. Or maybe they were interfering. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I was utterly alone, cut off. The bumping stopped. Silence, save for the storm and the incessant blare of the alarm. I held my breath, flashlight beam pinned to the hatch, every nerve screaming. Then, slowly, deliberately, one of the thick steel bolts securing the hatch began to turn. From the outside. Impossible. The mechanism was internal. There was no way to manipulate it from the roof. Yet, I watched, frozen in horror, as the bolt screeched in protest, turning millimeter by millimeter, driven by some unseen force. Rule 4. If the foghorn sounds 3 times, lock the inner steel door at the base of the tower. Do not open it for any reason until sunrise. Finch hadn't mentioned the lantern room hatch. But the principle felt terrifyingly relevant. Lock the doors. Keep it out. The first bolt clicked free, hanging loose. My paralysis broke. I lunged towards the hatch, grabbing the heavy wrench from the emergency toolkit mounted nearby. If it was turning one, maybe I could tighten the others, buy myself time. As I reached the hatch, the second bolt began to turn, faster this time. The giggle returned, louder now, right above my head, accompanied by a wet, slurping sound. I slammed the wrench onto the third bolt, trying to tighten it against the unholy torque. Metal shrieked against metal. For a moment, I felt resistance, then the bolt held. But the entity above simply moved to the fourth and final bolt. It began to turn almost effortlessly. I scrambled, trying to tighten the third again, then back to the fourth, a frantic, losing battle against an invisible, impossibly strong opponent. The third bolt finally gave way under the pressure, spinning freely. The fourth bolt clicked loose. All 4 bolts now hung open. The only thing holding the hatch was its own weight and the simple latch mechanism. The bumping started again, harder now, shaking the entire steel plate. The latch rattled violently. I backed away, wrench held uselessly like a child's toy. The beam from the stationary lighthouse lens suddenly felt accusatory, illuminating my failure. With a final, deafening bang, the hatch blew inwards, not falling, but flying across the room with terrifying force, smashing into the delicate lens assembly. Glass exploded outwards. The main bulb flickered violently and died, plunging the lantern room into near absolute darkness, save for the rhythmic flashing of the red emergency lights and my trembling flashlight beam. The alarm stopped, abruptly cut off by the impact or the power surge. The sudden silence, broken only by the storm and the dripping blood, was more terrifying than the noise. Slowly, illuminated in pulsing red strobes, something began to descend from the jagged opening where the hatch had been. It wasn't solid. It flowed, like thick, dark oil mixed with bloody rags and something that writhed. Long, pale, multi-jointed limbs unfolded from the amorphous mass as it dripped onto the floor, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape, impossibly tall and thin, its head lolling at an unnatural angle. It made no sound as it formed, except for a faint, constant, wet-sucking noise. My flashlight beam landed on its face, or where its face should have been. There was only smooth, pale, empty skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Yet, I felt it looking at me. And from that blank, featureless expanse, the childish giggle echoed once more, wetter, closer. It raised one dripping, multi-jointed arm, pointing a long, needle-sharp finger directly at me. My breath hitched. The creature took a step, its multi-jointed legs bending at impossible angles, moving with a fluid grace that was utterly wrong for its size and apparent lack of structure. The wet sucking sound intensified as it advanced, leaving glistening trails of dark fluid on the metal floor. The red emergency lights pulsed, catching glimpses of things moving beneath its pale, featureless skin. Run! The single imperative word cut through my terror. I scrambled backwards, flashlight beam waving wildly, illuminating shattered glass, the ruined lens, and the steadily advancing horror. The wrench felt impossibly heavy and useless in my hand. It giggled again, the sound seeming to vibrate in the air around me. It was faster than it looked. It covered the distance to the ruined lens assembly in 2 disjointed strides, its blank face tilting as if examining the damage it had caused. Blood and dark fluid dripped from its limbs onto the broken glass. I didn't wait. Spinning around, I lunged for the spiral staircase, the only way down. My boots slipped on the blood-slick floor, sending me sprawling. Pain shot through my wrist as I landed hard. Scrambling up, ignoring the throbbing, I reached the stairwell opening and plunged downwards, flashlight beam bouncing chaotically off the metal steps ahead. Behind me, I heard a sickening, wet slurp sound, followed by movement. Glancing back up, framed in the red pulsing light of the ruined lantern room doorway, the creature was pouring itself into the narrow stairwell. It wasn't climbing, it was flowing like viscous tar, its pale limbs stretching and contorting to fit the confined space, the featureless head swiveling downwards towards me. The sucking sound was louder now, echoing unnervingly in the metal tube of the staircase. Panic lent speed to my descent. I half ran, half fell down the steps, the flashlight beam my only guide in the near-total darkness, the storm's fury a muted roar outside the thick stone walls. How far down was the living area? 50 feet? 60. It felt like miles. The creature was faster. I could hear it flowing down the steps behind me, the wet, slithering sound punctuated by sharp clicks, perhaps its needle-like fingers finding purchase on the metal. It wasn't rushing, though. It felt like it was savoring the pursuit. My foot slipped. I tumbled down half a flight of stairs, crashing against the railing, the flashlight flying from my grasp. It bounced once, twice, then winked out, plunging me into absolute blackness. Only the faint, rhythmic pulse of the emergency lights far above offered any orientation. Pain flared in my shoulder and knee. I lay there stunned, gasping for air, listening. The slithering sound above had stopped. Had it lost me in the dark? Or was it waiting? Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. My eyes strained against the oppressive darkness. I could just make out the faint outline of the steps below from the residual red light filtering down. I had to keep moving. Forget the flashlight. Crawling on hands and knees felt safer, less likely to result in another fall. I moved downwards, step by agonizing step, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart and the distant storm. Where was it? Then I felt it. A drop of cold, viscous liquid landed on the back of my neck. My head snapped up. In the faint red pulse from above, I saw it clinging to the ceiling of the stairwell directly over me, like some monstrous, pale spider. Its limbs were splayed out, adhering to the curved metal, its featureless face aimed directly down at me. The sucking sound was deafeningly close. A strangled cry escaped my lips. I threw myself forward, tumbling down the remaining steps, landing in a heap on the solid stone floor of the lower level. I scrambled away from the stairwell opening, crab-walking backwards into the darkness of the main tower base, expecting it to drop down any second. But it didn't follow immediately. I heard a wet tearing sound from the stairwell, followed by a soft thud. Peering cautiously towards the opening, I saw nothing in the gloom. Where were the living quarters? To the left. I fumbled along the cold, damp stone wall, desperate to find the doorway, the inner steel door Finch had mentioned. My hands brushed against something rough. Controls for the foghorn. My fingers spasmed. Rule 4. If the foghorn sounds 3 times, lock the inner steel door. Could I trigger it myself? Would it even do anything against that? No time to think. I found the archway leading towards the small living area. Stumbling inside, I slammed the simple wooden door shut, flimsy, useless, and fumbled for a light switch. My fingers found the toggle, flipped it. Nothing. The power surge must have knocked out the main lights down here too. Where was the steel door? Finch's log mentioned it was at the base of the tower. Was it further in? Or was this it? This section housed the backup generator, fuel tanks, and access to the very lowest levels and the sea-facing foundations. A low, guttural moan echoed from the stairwell I just exited. It wasn't the creature's giggle. This was different, filled with pain. Was it hurt? Or was it, changing? Then came a sound that stopped my breath, the slow, deliberate clang, clang, clang of something heavy being dragged down the metal spiral staircase. The dragging sound was agonizingly slow. Clang, scrape, clang. Metal on metal, echoing up from the base of the tower and down from the stairwell the creature occupied. It was getting closer, but not with the terrifying speed the creature itself possessed. This was something different. Something heavy. I backed away from the flimsy wooden door of the living area, deeper into the main base chamber. My eyes, slowly adjusting to the profound darkness, could make out massive shapes, the backup generator, large fuel tanks, stacked crates. The air here was colder, damper, carrying the sharp tang of diesel and the ever-present smell of brine and old blood. Where was the steel door? My foot slipped on something wet. Looking down, I could just discern a dark, glistening patch spreading across the stone floor, originating from beneath a heavy iron door set low in the wall facing the sea. Salt water. Rule 7. If you find saltwater puddles inside the tower where they shouldn't be, report equipment malfunction immediately. Do not touch the water with bare skin. This puddle was definitely above the high tide mark. Malfunction? Or something else? The door looked ancient, heavily bolted, leading perhaps to the foundations, the very base of the needle where it met the raging Atlantic. The dragging sound reached the bottom of the spiral staircase. It stopped. Silence descended again, thick and expectant. I pressed myself back against the cold curve of a fuel tank, straining to hear, my injured wrist throbbing in time with my pulse. A soft, wet thump echoed from the stairwell opening, followed by another. The sound of something heavy and sodden being dropped onto the stone floor. Then, the slithering, sucking sound of the creature moving again, no longer flowing, but dragging itself across the floor towards the center of the chamber. My gaze was fixed on the stairwell archway. In the almost non-existent light, a shape began to emerge. It was the creature, pulling itself along the floor, its multi-jointed limbs moving awkwardly. It looked damaged. One of its long, pale arms was twisted at an unnatural angle, hanging limply. Dark fluid oozed from several rents in its featureless skin. Had the fall down the stairs injured it? Or had something else happened? It ignored me, focused entirely on what it was dragging. Slowly, agonizingly, it pulled its burden fully into view. It was Alistair Finch. Or what was left of him. His body was horribly mangled, limbs broken and twisted, clothes shredded and soaked in blood and seawater. But the most grotesque part was his head. It was tilted back at an impossible angle, jaw hanging open in a silent scream, and sprouting from his eye sockets, mouth, and throat were pulsating, fleshy tendrils, glistening black in the gloom, anchoring him somehow to the creature that dragged him. He looked like a horrific marionette, his body a mere vessel. The creature dragged Finch's corpse towards the center of the room, towards another feature I hadn't noticed in the darkness, a circular metal grate set directly into the stone floor, easily 10 feet across. The wet sucking sound seemed to emanate from the grate itself, accompanied by a faint, rhythmic pulsing from beneath, like a giant, sluggish heartbeat. The creature stopped at the edge of the grate. It released Finch's body, which lay in a broken heap. Then, the creature did something truly bizarre. It began to unravel. Its pale limbs retracted, folding into its torso. The featureless skin rippled and split, revealing not flesh and bone, but layers of tightly packed, dark, fibrous material interwoven with pulsating veins of sickly yellow light. It collapsed inwards, shrinking, reforming, until it was no longer the towering, spindly horror, but a pulsating, vaguely organic mass hunched over the grate. The wet sucking sound intensified, merging with the rhythmic thrumming from below. Was it feeding? Communicating? Or changing into something else entirely? I couldn't stay here. The steel door, where was it? I scanned the perimeter of the chamber again. Generator, fuel tanks, the iron door leading to the foundations, the stairwell, and there, tucked away in an alcove almost directly opposite the stairwell, half hidden behind stacked crates, was another doorway. It had to be it. Heavy steel, riveted, with a massive wheel lock mechanism. Slowly, trying to make absolutely no sound, I began to edge along the wall towards the alcove, keeping the pulsating mass and Finch's corpse between me and the creature. The stone floor was slick with salt water and blood. Every step felt treacherous. The thrumming from beneath the grate grew stronger, vibrating through the floor. The organic mass pulsed faster, emitting a low, guttural hum. The fleshy tendril snaking from Finch's head began to twitch, lifting his corpse slightly, turning it towards the grate as if in offering. I reached the crates, slipping behind them. The steel door was just feet away. The wheel lock looked rusted, ancient. Would it even turn? Suddenly, the mass on the grate convulsed. It let out a high-pitched shriek, utterly unlike the giggle or the moans from before. This was raw, primal agony. The yellow light within it flared violently. It reared up, no longer an amorphous blob, but thrashing blindly, its remaining intact arm flailing. It knew I was here. It screeched again, whipping its head, now reforming, still featureless but more defined, towards my hiding place. It couldn't see me, but it could sense me. No more stealth. I lunged for the steel door, grabbing the rusted wheel lock with both hands, ignoring the searing pain in my injured wrist. I threw all my weight into it. It didn't budge. Rusted shut. Or locked from the other side. Behind me, the creature detached itself from the grate with a wet tearing sound. It was reforming rapidly, limbs snapping back into place, though still damaged. It turned fully towards me, that blank face radiating pure malevolence. It started to drag itself across the floor, faster now, its one good arm pulling its broken body along, leaving a thick smear of dark fluid in its wake. Desperate, I slammed my shoulder against the wheel lock, trying to use leverage. Still nothing. I kicked the door in frustration. Solid steel. Impenetrable. The creature was halfway across the room. I could hear its ragged, sucking breaths. I looked around frantically. Generator controls. Fuel lines. Was there anything I could use as a weapon? Anything to slow it down? My eyes fell on the iron door set low in the wall, the one leaking salt water. The foundations. Rule 5, do not leave the lighthouse structure between sunset and sunrise. The jetty is not safe after dark. This wasn't the jetty, but it led out. Out to the base, where the waves crashed. Maybe I could circle around, find another way up or away. It was insane, but staying here was certain death. The creature shrieked again, lunging forward. I didn't hesitate. Throwing myself towards the iron door, I fumbled with the heavy bolts. 3 of them, rusted but movable. The first one screeched open. The creature was almost upon me. The second bolt slid back. I could feel the cold spray hitting my face from under the door, could hear the deafening roar of the waves just outside. The third bolt, stuck. The creature screeched, a sound like tearing metal, and launched itself across the remaining distance. Its needle-sharp fingers scrabbled at my legs as I desperately wrenched at the third, rusted bolt. I kicked out blindly, connecting with something yielding but tough. The creature recoiled momentarily, giving me the split second I needed. With a final, agonized heave, the bolt shrieked free. I yanked the heavy iron door open just as the creature lunged again. Salt spray and the deafening roar of the Atlantic exploded into the chamber. The wind ripped the door from my grasp, slamming it violently against the inner stone wall. I threw myself through the opening, out onto a narrow, treacherous ledge slick with seawater and algae. Outside, the storm was a physical entity. Wind tore at my clothes, threatening to rip me from my precarious footing. Waves crashed against the base of the lighthouse mere feet below, sending plumes of freezing spray high into the air, soaking me instantly. The ledge, barely 3 feet wide, seemed to curve around the base of the tower, disappearing into darkness in both directions. There was no railing, just sheer, ancient stone rising above and the churning abyss of the sea below. Rule 5, do not leave the lighthouse structure. The jetty is not safe after dark. This wasn't the jetty, but the warning felt chillingly relevant. Behind me, from the doorway, came that awful, wet sucking sound, followed by the clicking of the creature's limbs on stone. It was squeezing through the low opening, flowing onto the ledge after me. There was nowhere to go but forward. Hunching against the wind, shielding my face from the stinging spray, I began to edge along the ledge, away from the pursuing horror. My boots slipped constantly on the slick surface. Every few feet, a larger wave would boom against the rock below, sending sheets of water cascading over the ledge, trying to tear me away. The creature was surprisingly adept out here. It moved low, its multi-jointed limbs finding purchase where I struggled. It wasn't fast, hampered perhaps by its injuries or the unfamiliar terrain, but it was relentless, steadily closing the distance. Its blank face was fixed in my direction, an eyeless, unblinking predator. Ahead, the ledge seemed to widen slightly as it curved around the tower base. Was there another entrance? A way back inside? Or did it just lead to a dead end against the open sea? Then, the singing returned. Not from the air this time, but from the water. It rose above the storm's roar, clearer, closer, weaving intricate, mournful harmonies with the crashing waves. It seemed to emanate from the churning darkness just beyond the reach of the faint light spilling from the open iron doorway behind me. As I risked a glance towards the sound, shapes began to resolve in the spray-filled darkness below. Pale, vaguely human forms, moving with unnatural speed within the crashing waves. Their limbs were too long, their movements too fluid, their eyes, glowing faintly with phosphorescent light, fixed upwards. Towards me. Towards the creature. The creature on the ledge behind me paused. It emitted a low, guttural clicking sound, its featureless head tilting towards the sea, towards the singing and the shapes in the water. Was it communicating? Or was it sensing a rival threat? The figures in the water drew closer to the base of the rock, their pale faces upturned, their singing now a focused, beckoning call. One of them, impossibly tall and gaunt, began to climb the sheer rock face below the ledge, its long, wet fingers finding impossible holds in the wave-battered stone. Trapped. The creature behind me, the new horrors climbing from the sea in front. The storm raged, the waves crashed, the singing intensified, promising oblivion. The creature on the ledge made its choice. With a sudden, surprising burst of speed, ignoring me completely, it launched itself off the ledge, not towards me, but towards the climbing figure below. The two entities collided mid-air with a sickening crunch and a piercing shriek that momentarily drowned out the storm. They tumbled together into the black, churning water below. I stared, stunned, as the sea swallowed them both. The singing faltered for a moment, replaced by thrashing sounds and guttural roars from beneath the waves, then resumed, though weaker now, more distant. The other figures in the water seemed to retreat slightly, fading back into the darkness. Was it gone? Had they taken care of each other? Hope warred with terror. I was still stranded on the ledge, soaked, freezing, injured, in the middle of a raging storm. The iron door back inside was meters away, possibly blocked again by the creature, or worse. Then, a new sound. Above me. Scraping. Coming from the lantern room level. Had the creature somehow gotten back up there? Or was there another one? I looked up the sheer, rain-slicked stone face of the lighthouse tower. High above, near the fractured glass of the lantern room, silhouetted against the faint residual glow from the emergency lights, something was clinging to the outside of the tower. It wasn't the pale, multi-limbed creature. This was smaller, hunched, covered in what looked like dark, ragged feathers or seaweed. And it was methodically, patiently, prying at the already damaged glass panel. My gaze remained fixed upwards, squinting against the driving rain and the disorienting pulse of the red emergency light still faintly visible through the fractured lantern room glass. The new shape clinging high above was starkly different from the pale, flowing horror I'd just witnessed. This one was compact, hunched, its silhouette jagged against the faint glow. It looked almost bird-like, but grotesquely large, covered in matted, dark material, feathers slicked down by rain, or perhaps thick strands of wet seaweed. It moved with jerky, deliberate motions, prying at the edges of the cracked glass panel with what looked like taloned limbs. A new fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my exhaustion and the residual terror from the first creature. Was this place a nexus for multiple horrors? Were the singing figures in the water, the pale thing, and this bird-like entity all different facets of the same nightmare, or entirely separate menaces drawn to this isolated spire of rock? The ledge offered no shelter. The wind howled, trying to peel me from the stone. The waves below crashed with unrelenting fury, reminding me of the pale shape still potentially lurking beneath the surface. The iron door back into the relative safety of the tower base was meters behind me, potentially guarded by whatever remained of the first creature, or perhaps locked again by some internal mechanism triggered by the open portal to the sea. Going back seemed as dangerous as staying put. Which left only one path, forward, along the curve of the ledge, into the unknown darkness. My flashlight was gone, lost in the stairwell. I had only the storm's chaotic gloom and the intermittent sweep of faint red light from above. Taking a shuddering breath, tasting salt and fear, I started moving again, pressing my body flat against the cold, wet stone of the lighthouse wall. Each step was a gamble. The ledge remained slick, treacherous. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Above, the scraping sound intensified. A sharp crack echoed, louder than the storm. Looking up, I saw a large shard of the lantern room glass detach and plummet downwards, spinning end over end before shattering against the rocks far below, narrowly missing the ledge where I stood. The bird-like creature repositioned itself, resuming its efforts on the now larger opening. It was trying to get inside the lantern room. Why? Was it drawn to the light? Or was something else in there? I forced myself to look forward, focusing on survival. The ledge began to narrow again, the curve tightening. Ahead, swallowed by darkness, I thought I could make out a shape interrupting the smooth curve of the tower wall. Another door. An outcrop. Suddenly, the singing from the water surged again, closer this time, directly below me. Risking a glance down, I saw them, 3 pale figures, treading water with impossible ease amidst the violent waves, their phosphorescent eyes fixed on me. They weren't climbing this time, just watching, their mournful, beckoning song trying to lull me towards the edge. Ignore the singing. It isn't real. But their eyes looked terrifyingly real. Just as I turned away from the hypnotic horror below, my foot slipped. My injured arm, useless in its sling, offered no balance. I scrabbled at the wet stone wall, fingers finding no purchase. For a heart-stopping moment, I teetered on the brink, the abyss of churning water and pale, watching eyes yawning below me. Then, a hand shot out from the darkness ahead, grabbing my slicker, yanking me forward with surprising strength, pulling me away from the edge and stumbling into the relative shelter of a shallow recess carved into the lighthouse wall. I collapsed onto the slightly drier stone, gasping, heart hammering against my ribs. Looking up, my eyes straining in the gloom, I saw a figure huddled in the back of the recess, obscured by shadow. It wasn't the bird creature, nor the pale horror. This was human-shaped, smaller, wrapped in dark, heavy oilskins. Before I could speak, before I could even process this impossible rescue, the figure raised a trembling finger to where its lips should be, urging silence. And from the darkness of its hood, 2 eyes glinted, reflecting the faint red light, eyes filled not with malice, but with an equally unsettling, profound madness. The figure remained huddled, almost perfectly still, only the glint in their eyes confirming they were alive and aware. Rain and spray dripped from the hood of their oilskins. They smelled faintly of brine, old fish, and something sharp, like ammonia. Close up, they looked impossibly old, skin wrinkled and weathered like driftwood, yet there was a wiry strength in the hand that had gripped my slicker. Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely audible above the storm. The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, they raised that trembling finger again, pointing back along the ledge towards the iron door I'd escaped through. Then, they drew a slow, deliberate line across their own throat with the same finger, the gesture stark and terrifyingly clear. Going back is death. My eyes darted back along the treacherous path. The faint amber light from the open doorway was still visible, pulsating slightly, but there was no sign of the pale creature. Had it retreated inside? Or had it fallen? Below, the singing had faded, the pale shapes in the water seemingly gone, though the crashing waves remained a constant, violent presence. Above, the scraping continued, relentless. The bird creature was still working at the lantern room glass. Why hadn't the pale creature gone up there? Were they enemies? Or simply ignoring each other? The figure in the recess shifted slightly, drawing my attention back. They tapped the stone floor beside them, then pointed towards the darkness where the ledge continued. "Stay here. Go forward. Is there another way in?" I asked, desperation edging my voice. Another door. The figure shook their head slowly, a barely perceptible movement in the gloom. Then, they reached inside their oilskins, fumbling for something. After a moment, they produced a small, water-damaged object, holding it out to me in a shaking hand. It was a sodden, warped fragment of Finch's leather-bound notebook. My heart leaped. How had they gotten this? Had they known Finch? Were they Finch? But this person seemed ancient, far older than Finch's record suggested. I took the fragment. Most pages were fused together, the ink blurred into illegibility by salt water. But one page, protected somehow, remained partially readable. The handwriting was Finch's, but frantic, almost indecipherable. Not automated, feeds, the light, needs the dark, sacrifice, below the great. They chose. The rest was smudged beyond recognition. Feeds the light. Sacrifice below the great. My mind flashed back to the pulsating organic mass Finch's corpse offered before it, the thrumming heartbeat from beneath the metal grating. What unspeakable process powered this lighthouse? The figure watched me intently, their mad eyes searching my face as if gauging my understanding. They tapped the notebook fragment again, then pointed emphatically downwards, towards the base of the tower, towards the sea. Then, they made a strange, repeated gesture, curling their fingers into a claw, then opening them wide, over and over. Opening. Closing. Grasping. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed from above. Both of us flinched, looking up. The bird creature had finally broken through the remaining fractured glass. Its dark, hunched shape disappeared into the blackness of the unlit lantern room. A moment later, a horrific, drawn-out screech ripped through the storm, a sound of pure agony, abruptly cut short. Silence fell from above, heavy and absolute. Had it encountered something else inside? Or had it simply achieved its goal? The figure beside me began to tremble violently, emitting a low, guttural moan. They clutched their head, rocking back and forth in the recess. Gone. They rasped, the first word I'd heard them speak clearly. The voice was like dry leaves skittering on stone. Light's hungry, always hungry. Before I could react, before I could ask what they meant, the very stone beneath us began to vibrate. Not just from the storm, but with a deep, resonant frequency, the same thrumming pulse I'd felt near the grate, now amplified, shaking the entire tower. The figure shrieked, scrambling back further into the recess, eyes wide with terror. They pointed frantically towards the iron door leading back inside, then back at me, then made the throat-slitting gesture again with even more desperate urgency. The thrumming intensified. The sea below seemed to respond, waves crashing higher, more violently. And from the churning darkness, the singing returned, no longer mournful, but a deafening, discordant chorus filled with raw hunger and rage. Pale shapes surged in the water, their phosphorescent eyes blazing, looking up not just at the ledge, but at the entire lighthouse, as if answering a summons. The iron door, meters away, began to glow faintly with the same sickly yellow light I'd seen pulsing within the creature on the grate. It wasn't just a door anymore. It was becoming a beacon. A focal point for the horrors gathering below. And from inside the tower, beyond that glowing door, I heard it again. Wet, rhythmic sucking. And slow, deliberate, dragging footsteps. Coming closer. The thrumming intensified, shaking the very rock I clung to. The yellow light radiating from the iron door pulsed brighter, casting grotesque, elongated shadows within the recess. The ancient figure beside me whimpered, pressing themselves impossibly flat against the stone, hands covering their ears as if to block out both the storm and the rising chorus from the sea. Below, the pale shapes in the water surged closer, their phosphorescent eyes like a constellation of hungry stars fixed on the glowing doorway. Their song was a physical force now, vibrating in my bones, promising dissolution. But the immediate threat was inside. The wet, sucking sound and the dragging footsteps were just beyond the glowing iron door. Clang, scrape. It sounded heavier than before, more labored. What is that? I screamed at the huddled figure, needing an answer, any answer. It remakes. They gasped, words barely coherent. Takes, the broken, feeds the light. Feeds the light. Finch's words. The pulsating mass. Finch's corpse. Was the creature rebuilding itself using Alistair's remains? Or creating something new? The glowing door began to buckle outwards, the ancient metal groaning under immense pressure from within. Rivulets of the sickly yellow light, thick like sap, oozed from the straining seams. The sucking sound intensified, becoming a vortex of noise pulling at my senses. The figure beside me scrabbled at my arm, their mad eyes locking onto mine. Not safe here. They rasped, pointing desperately along the ledge into the darkness. Tunnel, high, above the water. Another way. I followed their trembling finger. Further along the curve of the lighthouse, obscured by shadow and spray, was a dark opening I hadn't noticed before, a narrow fissure or tunnel entrance, slightly higher up the rock face, perhaps 10 feet beyond our precarious shelter. Was it an old drainage channel? An access point? The iron door behind us screeched, bowing further outwards. A pale, multi-jointed limb, thicker and more grotesque than before, crudely wrapped in strips of what looked sickeningly like human skin and tattered clothing, punched through the weakening metal near the top hinge. The yellow light flared. There was no choice. Staying meant being caught between the remade horror inside and the hungry sea below. Go! I yelled, pushing myself away from the wall. The figure didn't need urging. They scuttled out of the recess with surprising agility, moving low and fast along the ledge towards the fissure, disappearing into the darkness. I followed, scrambling on the slick stone, the wind tearing at me, the hungry song from below seeming to claw at my ankles. Behind me, the iron door finally gave way with a deafening roar, ripped from its hinges and flung outwards into the storm, vanishing into the waves below. Framed in the doorway, bathed in the pulsating yellow light emanating from the tower's depths, stood the remade creature. It was larger, misshapen, parts of Finch's tattered uniform crudely integrated into its pale, flowing mass. Multiple limbs, some pale and spindly, others thick and wrapped in flesh, flailed erratically. The tendrils that had sprouted from Finch's head now writhed from the creature's own featureless face, questing blindly in the storm-filled air. It let out a gurgling, multi-toned roar, Finch's dying scream interwoven with the creature's own chilling vocalizations. It saw me. I didn't look back again. Throwing caution to the wind, I half ran, half crawled the remaining distance to the fissure, praying the old figure hadn't led me to a dead end. The opening was narrow, barely shoulder width, reeking of damp earth and decay. I squeezed inside just as I heard the creature begin its pursuit, its heavy, uneven footsteps, thump, drag, thump, echoing behind me on the ledge. Inside the fissure, it was pitch black and claustrophobic. Water trickled down the rough walls. It sloped steeply upwards. I fumbled blindly, pulling myself up the rough incline, hearing the creature reach the entrance behind me, the wet sucking sound filling the narrow space. Then, light. Faint, flickering, up ahead. And the sound of scrabbling, hurried movement. The old figure. Wait! I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the confined space. The light source ahead, a flickering, ancient-looking oil lantern, stopped moving. I scrambled upwards towards it, emerging into a slightly wider section of the tunnel, a small natural cave barely large enough for 2 people. The old figure stood there, holding the lantern aloft, their face still mostly hidden by shadow, but their eyes glinting with that familiar madness. They weren't looking at me, but past me, back down the tunnel I'd just climbed. Their body was tense, radiating fear. It comes. They whispered, confirming my terror. The creature was following us into the tunnel. The figure turned, holding the lantern towards the back of the small cave. There was no other exit. Just solid rock. A dead end. We were trapped. The wet, dragging sounds echoed from the narrow passage below, closer now, impossibly close. Thump, drag, scrape, suck. The creature was forcing its remade, grotesque form up the incline. The flickering lantern light cast our distorted shadows onto the damp rock walls of the small cave, making the confined space feel even smaller, tightening around us like a fist. No way out. I yelled at the old figure, panic finally shredding my composure. You led us to a dead end. They flinched, not at my words, but at a particularly loud scraping sound from below. They shook their head frantically, eyes wide with terror, and pointed a trembling, skeletal finger towards the seemingly solid rock face at the back of the cave. Not end. They rasped, voice barely a whisper. Way through. I swung the beam of my scavenged flashlight, useless now, I realized, compared to the lantern's glow, towards the rock. It looked solid, seamless. Where? There's nothing there. The figure shuffled forward, lantern held high. They reached out a hand, tracing lines on the rock face invisible to my eye. As their fingers moved, a faint, sickly yellow luminescence, identical to the light from the tower base and the creature's core, began to glow along the lines they traced, forming the outline of a low, narrow doorway, previously perfectly camouflaged. It wasn't stone, it looked like tightly packed, petrified fibrous material, similar to what I'd seen when the creature unraveled. Quick! The figure urged, pushing weakly against the outlined section. It didn't budge. Below, a gurgling roar echoed up the passage. The creature was close, perhaps only feet below the cave entrance. Its sucking breath sounded like a blocked drain trying to clear itself. I shoved the old figure aside, putting my own shoulder to the glowing outline. It felt strangely warm, almost alive, pulsing faintly with that yellow light. I pushed with all my might, adrenaline surging, pain from my injuries momentarily forgotten. The section groaned, resisting. Together, the figure croaked, adding their meager weight beside me. Scrape. The creature was right at the entrance to the cave below us. With a final, desperate heave, the panel gave way, not swinging open, but sliding inwards with a soft, organic squelch, revealing another passage beyond, even darker and narrower than the one we were in, descending steeply. The air that rushed out was freezing cold and carried the scent of deep earth and something else, something indescribably ancient and wrong. Go, the figure shrieked, shoving me towards the opening. I didn't hesitate, scrambling into the pitch-black void, half sliding, half falling down the unseen slope. Behind me, I heard the old figure struggling to follow, the lantern casting fleeting, distorted shadows. Then, the horrific sound of the creature entering the small cave, a wet, multi-limbed scramble. A thin, piercing scream cut through the darkness, the old figure. Then, a wet, tearing sound, abruptly silenced. The lantern clattered, extinguished. I landed hard at the bottom of the slope, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I was in another tunnel, lightless, freezing cold. Above, from the opening I'd just tumbled through, came the triumphant, gurgling roar of the creature, followed by the sickening sounds of it, feeding. I choked back bile, scrambling away from the base of the slope, deeper into the absolute darkness, driven now not just by fear, but by the horrific certainty of what happened to my rescuer. The creature knew I was down here. And now, there was nothing between us.